Okay.
This Jigyasa program used to be done by Mr. Arun Kumar and one Professor Manoj, and they used to do it at their residence, especially for the benefit of Dr. Sampath. They used to organize these informally at their residence.
I see.
Then a few years ago, Professor Manoj passed away, and of course we wanted to have a larger gathering. So the All India Services Pensioners Association, we adopted this Jigyasa Forum and we started organizing. So last 3.5 years, we've been doing this. And this is a completely non-partisan, neutral platform. We invite all kinds of speakers. The whole idea is to address people's curiosities, to share knowledge, to meet great authors and eminent people, and to have a contact. And our purposes are both, while we inform, we also at least attempt to entertain people, not purely an exercise of scholarship as such. And then we've had a wide variety of subjects, even things like how to age well, and on Shankaracharya or Duryodhan, or climate change, on man's changing perception of the black hole. Mr. Kumar himself gave a talk on the subject. So we have had a variety of subjects, India, China. Talks once a month, and after a 40-45 minute talk, then we invite any questions, discussions, or comments. Now lately we've also started recording these talks so that they are available in our YouTube's archives. So this is an attempt. We are surely not as vibrant intellectually as Bangalore, or you might see Jaipur during Jaipur Literature Festival, but it's a modest attempt to keep things intellectually alive.
Yes.
So that is what we are doing. We have also requested our colleagues to let us know what sort of topics they would like to hear speakers on, or what kind of speakers they'd like to invite, so that we also cater to their tastes and interests. So that's in sum the kind of history, brief history, since you are a historian. Brief history. Sometime later, maybe after a few decades, people might wish to know what were the tastes and interests of people. They can always look at our archives. So that is what it is. Now I'll request Shri Arun Kumar to kindly formally introduce our speaker today, Dr. Vikram Sampath. Many of us know you through your work, but we would request him to kindly introduce you formally and know all about your background.
Thank you, Naren. Thank you. Friends, we have today with us a scholar of great eminence, Dr. Vikram Sampath. We welcome him to Jigyasa, a forum of our association. A very hearty welcome to you, Dr. Sampath.
Thank you. Thank you.
Based in Bangalore, Dr. Sampath is an engineer mathematician from WITS Pilani and an MBA in finance from SP Institute of Management and Research, Mumbai. Dr. Sampath has a doctorate in history and music from the University of Queensland, Australia. Dr. Sampath is a person with diverse interests varying from music to history. He has authored several widely acclaimed books: Splendors of Royal Mysore, The Untold Story of Wadeyars, My Name is Gauhar Jan, The Life and Times of a Musician, Voice of the Veena, S. Palchandar, a biography, Women of the Records, Indian Classical Music and Gramophone, 1900 to 1930, and an upcoming Bravehearts of Bharat. His two-volume biography, Savarkar, echoes from a forgotten past, and Savarkar, a contested legacy, have become national bestsellers and were acclaimed by our Prime Minister. For his book on Gauhar Jan, he was awarded the Sahitya Akademi's first Yuva Puraskar in English Literature and the ARSC International Award for Excellence in Historical Research in New York. The book has also been adapted to theatre as a play, Gauhar, by Lilith Dubey, and is being adapted to a film by Ashutosh Gawarikar. Dr. Sampath was a senior research fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, New Delhi. He is an Aspen Global Leadership Fellow and an Eisenhower Global Fellow 2021. He is also an adjunct senior research fellow at the Monash University, Australia. In 2021, Dr. Sampath was honored by being elected as a fellow of the United Kingdom's prestigious Royal Historical Society. This is a great recognition, I must say. Dr. Sampath is also an accomplished Carnatic vocalist. He has established the Archives of Indian Music, India's first digital sound archive for vintage recordings. He is the founder director of the Bangalore Literature Festival, Indic Thoughts Festival, and Earth, a culture festival. Savarkar has been an interesting personality, and we are all looking forward eagerly to your interpretation, Dr. Sampath's interpretation of his life and his times, of course. Thank you very much. Over to you, Dr. Sampath.
Thank you, Arun Kumarji, and a very good morning to everyone. It's truly my great privilege and honor and pleasure to be addressing all of you, people who were described famously as the steel frame of India. So it's really, an honor to be talking to you and sharing a bit of my work with all of you. And that is why when Mr. Singh asked me to join all of you, it was with ready pleasure that I agreed. Of course, the topic that I'm trying to share with all of you is someone who is truly contested, a very, very contentious figure, much discussed, much debated. I don't think there are too many characters of the past who intrude contemporary politics, even electoral politics. It becomes a part of manifestos of various political parties, whether he should get the Bharat Ratna or not. The Rajasthan government spent a lot of public time and energy on deciding whether his name should be prefixed by a Veer or not. So he's someone who raises the heckles all the time, even today, after so many years after his death in 1966. Of course, he lived a long and stormy life, 83 long years, born in 1883 and died in 1966. So to be able to compress that long, stormy life and its numerous ups and downs in probably 45 minutes, that's going to be a challenge. So I'll see how I fare there. So Savarkar was born on 28th of May, 1883 in the small village called Bhagur in Nashik district in Maharashtra in a Chitpavan Brahmin family. And he was the second of three sons and also a daughter who was born to them. The elder brother was Baba Rao or Ganesh Damodar Savarkar. He was himself Vinayak Damodar, and the younger brother Narayan Rao and a sister Maina. Quite early in life, he lost his mother, and a few years later, he also lost his father to the epidemic of plague that was raging different parts of India, and particularly Maharashtra, towards the end of the 19th century. It was incidentally at that time that the British introduced the Epidemics and Diseases Act, which was in vogue even now during the COVID pandemic. But unlike now, when this act or the purpose of the government was to ensure that all the people who are affected by the pandemic get medical support, During the British time, the idea was certainly not that. There was widespread repression, and people were storming into the houses of patients, and it was almost treated like untouchability. People had to be thrown out of the villages and houses. Puja ghars were desecrated, women were molested. So all of this was happening sometime in the 1890s. And a lot of people, including Lokmanya, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, had taken cudgels on this and said, who is that brave son who is going to avenge these insults that we are facing? And actually the brave, they were not one but three, the Chafekar brothers in Maharashtra, who picked up the gun and assassinated the plague commissioner of Pune. This particular incident was perhaps, it sent shockwaves across Maharashtra. And what is important to know is that, all through this, 60, 70 long years of our history of our freedom movement, while the dominant narrative or the movement was the mass movement of Gandhi ji and the Congress and the non-violent movement, all along there was a non-violent, there was a violent uprising as well, an armed rebellion, right from starting with the 1857 uprising till 1946, which was the naval mutiny in Bombay, which finally catapulted us to freedom. So in that long, unending chain of several heroes and heroines who participated in this struggle, whose names unfortunately don't feature in the manner in which we understand the history of our freedom movement. So the Chafekar brothers were this important milestone in the history of our freedom struggle. And Savarkar was a young boy then, about 11 or 12 years old. He was seeing all this. The Chafekars were executed. They accepted the news with a smile on their lips and verses of the Bhagavad Gita. And that created something in so many people in Maharashtra, and so also in Savarkar also. And in front of the family goddess, Bhuja Bhavani, he takes an oath that till my last, I will keep fighting the enemy and I will kill him. And he followed this up. It seemed like a childish vow, but he followed it up with action too, by forming India's first ever organized secret society, what was initially called the Rashtra Bhakta Samuha. Later it became the Mitra Mela and transformed finally into Abhinav Bharat. Now, importantly, this organization, when we talk of revolution and revolutionaries, usually the inspiration seems to be Karl Marx and the Marxist genealogy. But here was a revolutionary movement which was actually not inspired by Karl Marx, but by the Italian revolutionaries, Mazzini and Garibaldi and others. And just as they had their young Italy in their country, we had this Abhinav Bharat, or young India, which soon spread its tentacles across different parts of Maharashtra and then also outside Maharashtra. Now, again, in the kind of narrative that we read, our textbooks, our popular history books, the revolutionaries are always a footnote where, it is shown to us that these are random acts of bravery of one or two, hot-blooded young men who threw bombs here and there, who assassinated somebody, and it did not account to much of an impact, and they did not work with any sense of strategy or coming together of thought. But that was completely false, as I was to discover in the course of my research, that at a time when there were no WhatsApp groups, there were no Zoom meetings for everyone to collectively meet, here was a group of young people across India, largely in their late teens, early 20s, networking across the length and breadth of the country, starting with Maharashtra and also simultaneously in Bengal, and then moving to Punjab, the United Provinces, UP, and different other parts of India. So, the Anushilan Samiti, Swadhin Bharat, several others which were there in Bengal, actively collaborated with Abhinav Bharat in Maharashtra and what was the objective? That is also important. Was it just anarchy and random violence that they were looking at, or was it a larger goal? And the larger goal was to insurrect or create an insurrection in the British Indian Army. It was thought by them, and rightly so, that the bulk of the British Army was composed of Indian soldiers. So if most of them, or at least a small part of them, could be seduced to patriotism, then it would be very easy that the edifice of the British Raj would come collapsing, is what they believed in. And so to try and repeat the experiment of 1857, where there was a revolt within the British Army, they thought that this was the best way to get an end to the British rule. And if you see the course of the history of the freedom movement, that was exactly how it unfolded, particularly with the Indian National Army of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, and finally the naval mutiny, which literally scared the British and forced their hands to sign the transfer of power to India. So the early seeds of this were sown by these organized secret societies, of which Savarkar was an important part. And so they were working together to create this insurrection in the army. Now, soon he also moved to Pune to the Ferguson College as a student, and Abhinav Bharat sprang up there as well. And there, protesting against the partition of Bengal in 1905, he organized India's first ever, the bonfire of foreign clothes. So when we think of bonfire, it's usually we think that it is Mahatma Gandhi and the Congress that comes to mind. But in 1905, it was when this first bonfire was done, for which he was even rusticated from college, and he had to pay a heavy price for that. And all these revolutionaries at that time, were championing the cause of complete freedom at a time, noteworthily, when the Congress, whether it was the moderate faction or the extremist faction, nobody was talking about freedom at that time. It was more about some kind of concessions, privileges, which could be handed out to the country, a little bit of participation in the whole process. But revolutionaries, even as early as 1905, were talking for complete freedom, be it Savarkar in Maharashtra, or in Bengal, you had people like Sri Aurobindo and others who were talking about the same thing. So after that, Savarkar goes away to London to study law. And in those 5 stormy years that he spent in London as a student, ostensibly, but that was also to organize the freedom movement or the liberation movement of India from outside the country. Now, one could ask, why did he have to go all the way to London to do that? But then it was in the early decades of the 20th century, the freedom movement had shifted to the shores outside India, because there it was much more easier to organize any kind of sedition, as the British called it, because within India, the anti-sedition laws were so strong that you could not really, you could be put in jail and sent away to Kalapani. But outside, you could criticize the government, you could have literature against it, you could write and organize yourself. So a lot of people had moved outside. And one such person was Shyamji Krishna Verma from Gujarat, who had gone away to London, and he had established this India House there in London, where he was giving scholarships to young people to come and apparently to study there, but then nationalistic young men and women who could come there and organize themselves for the liberation of the country. And so there was Savarkar, there was a host of others at the India House, Virendranath Chattopadhyay, Madanlal Dhingra, Madam Bhikaji Kama, Shyamji Krishna Verma himself, Sardar Singh Rana, numerous others, VVS Iyer, MPT Acharya, all of them who were working. It was almost like a microcosm of India, far away from the shores of India, in the India House in London. And in those 5 years, he did a number of things there while he was in London. One was, of course, to create a corpus of intellectual literature for the revolutionary movement, so that it is not considered as this, flash in the pan kind of a movement. So he actually translated the biography of Mazzini into Marathi. And more importantly, his contribution at that time was to write this seminal work on the 1857 uprising. something that had been dismissively, called till then as Sepoy Mutiny. He coined this whole term of it being the first war of Indian independence, spending 2 long years in the British Library using British documents to research on the uprising and provide an Indian version of that entire history. He wrote this book, which for several decades after it was written, served as actually a Bible for revolutionaries, be it Bhagat Singh, who actually, published the 3rd edition of the book, or a few decades later, Rash Bihari Bose and also Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, who took inspiration from this book. So this book outlined the whole, prescription of what a revolution actually means, what are its main features, and how would India go on the entire path of revolution, and using 1857 as a starting point for that. Now, of course, it's very interesting. The history of this book is a history in itself, because here was a book which obviously the British were so petrified of. They had actually written that at no cost this book should come into India. In fact, it goes down in the history of world literature as the first book which was banned even before it was published. So that was how worried the British were about the contents of the book. So when he actually wrote the original manuscript, that was in Marathi, so that was smuggled to India in these false bottom boxes. There would be 2 parts of the box. Underneath, you'd have the manuscript, or sometimes even, guns and pistols and bomb manuals and bombs and all that. And on the top, there would be something else, Christmas presents and so on. And escaping customs, these boxes would come from different parts, from port to port, and finally come to India. And that's how this manuscript initially came to his elder brother, Baba Rao, who took it to a printing press in Sholapur. There were chapas of the police, and so the manuscript had to be withdrawn. It was then sent back to London. From there, they sent it to France to get it published. The French police were activated, and so there was a raid even of the French police, so it was withdrawn from there. Then they sent it to Germany, and they thought, okay, since Germany had a lot of the Indology and study of Sanskrit and so on done there, they would know the Devanagari script of Marathi in which it was written. But then the printing press there did a complete mess of the whole typesetting. So it was withdrawn from there too. Then it went to Belgium, and that was where this book was finally published and then translated into English by VVS Iyer. And so this was the history of this book also, as to how this book actually reached Indian shores after so much of trouble. Now, similarly, while he was in London, he also organized, this whole idea of how to create bombs through bomb manuals. So one of his associates, Senapati Bapat, and from the Anushilan Samiti in Bengal, which was Chandra Das, both of them were sent to find out about this bomb manual. They found it with a Russian tailor somewhere in France. And then Hemchandra takes photographs of all these bomb manual pictures. And then they realize that the whole thing is in Russian. So Kala Akshar Bhains Barabar, you just don't know what is there in the manual. Then how do you use it? And then Senapati Bapat seemed to have had a German, a Russian girlfriend in Germany. So these revolutionaries, they were not just boring people. I think they had colorful lives. They had all of that going alongside. And this girlfriend who was studying medicine, so she took 6 months. Then she translated this whole manual from Russian to English. And then these were translated to multiple Indian languages and once again smuggled back to India. And these manuals then found their way to the revolutionaries in Bengal, to Tilak, to various other parts of India, to create simultaneous, insurrections in different parts. So you had the Alipur bombing case with Prafulla Chaki and Kanhaiya Lal Dutt and all of them. Barin Ghosh, Aurobindo Ghosh's younger brother, they had a copy of this manual. Similarly, in Nashik, there was a Nasik conspiracy and murder case by Anant Lakshman Kanhere, who ostensibly killed the local commissioner with a pistol which Savarkar had sent all the way from London. So the British were suddenly alarmed that, simultaneously they were being there were these, uprisings in different parts of India. And while they started their process of investigation, the needles of suspicion, first, of course, Savarkar's elder brother was apprehended, Baba Rao. He was sent away to Kalapani. And then the needle of suspicion went all the way to London, to this puny little man who probably never wielded a weapon ever in his life. But it really warms my heart as a writer to know that the pen was mightier than the sword, the British considered him as the most dangerous or D category criminal. And so they were very, very keen that at any cost, this man had to be deported to India. Because if he was there in London, as I said, it was not a crime to organize, activities against the government. So he would have, for lack of evidence and proof, he would have gotten away. So at any cost, they wanted to ensure that he's brought back to India. They put several unfair, strictures of the law against him, of the Fugitive and Offenders Act. He was not a fugitive. He was a bona fide student who had gone there on a scholarship. But as I said, the jottings too of the Home Secretary then, who was Churchill, was that we want this man back. So they ensured that he's, captured there. And interestingly, briefly, he goes away to Paris to spend time with Madam Bhikaji Kama and Shamji Krishna Verma and escape this constant surveillance that he was put under, but later realizes that he needs to come back and face the music, whatever it is. And the minute he lands at the Victoria railway station in London, the police surround him and he is arrested. And interestingly, the picture that I found there, this was actually the cover page of my first book. This was the photograph that was taken in the police station when, he was apprehended by the police. But look at the body language and the demeanor of the man. Unlike most criminals in, jails who have this profile picture, side profile, front view, and so on, here is somebody who's sitting with his arms crossed and, one leg over the other, with a complete look of defiance on his face, saying, I don't care what you're going to do. And so a trial was conducted in London, and he was then, of course, sent away back to India. So there again, there was a story within a story, where when he was being brought back to India in the ship, when the ship was docking at the French port of Marseille, he opened the porthole of the lavatory and somehow made a dash into the ocean and swam away and actually reached the shores. And that then became a case in itself, because his case as a lawyer was that I have now landed on French soil. So the British have no more any control over me. So it's now up to the French government to ensure whether they will give me, amnesty, or they will hand me over to the British. But since the British had forcibly taken him back onto the ship, this entire case became a case between two countries, Britain and France, at the Hague, International Court of Justice in Hague, just as what we are facing now with Jadhav between India and Pakistan. So a similar case that went on for quite some time. And the French press came down so heavily on its government, saying, France is supposed to be the mother of all, revolution, the equality, fraternity, democracy, and so on. And you are not supporting a revolutionary. And so, in fact, the French government collapsed because of the political flux that it created. But so determined was the British government to have this man back that they ensured that they had their way at Hague. And he was, Britain won the case against France, and this man was deported back to India. And the trial was conducted in India. And there too, it was an unfair trial. There was no lawyer. There was no, provision for an appeal. So it was basically a fixed match, and the outcome was known. And he was awarded one of the harshest punishments of 2 life imprisonments or 2 life transportations, as they were called, of 25 plus 25, which was 50 long years. So here was a young man who had gone to England to study and become a lawyer and arrested in 1910. And if he had survived these 50 years, he would have come back in 1960. In fact, the British had put up a patta on his neck, which said 1960, so that every day you look at it, you realize that it's going to take me that much longer to get out of jail. In fact, it is said by the court records that when the punishment was pronounced, he stands up with a smile and says, "Thank you, my lord, for confirming the Hindu belief that there are two lives. There is incarnation, reincarnation, because by giving me 2 life imprisonments, you have actually accepted the Hindu philosophy of reincarnation." So after this, he was packed away to the dreaded Indian Bastille of the cellular jail, or Kalapani, which was again another chapter in his life where the harshest of punishments that people could, imagine. Not even the basic, human facilities of good food, medical facilities or toilets and so on, given to not only Savarkar, but almost 100 other revolutionaries who were lodged there from different parts of India. And I think it's, when one goes to the cellular jail, one is really filled with so much of emotion that these were the kind of, inhuman tortures that our forefathers faced, that all of us today could live and breathe in fresh and free air. But then we don't even know the names of many of the people who were lodged in these terrible circumstances. Just to recount some of the horrors that these people faced there, there would be fixed timings when you could use the restrooms also, and most often the food that was served to them would be basi khana. It would have pieces of reptiles and lizards and all of that, and eating that, most of them would end up with diarrhea. And so if you had to visit the washroom, you could not, because there was only fixed timings when you could go there. And so most of the prisoners defecated in their cells. And so sitting, sleeping, eating amidst your own squalor, standing handcuffs, for several weeks and sometimes even months. So people would again urinate, defecate as they were standing. They had this Koluka bell, punishment, where instead of the bullock at the other end of the oil grinding machine, it would be the freedom fighter who would be placed there. And in that blazing heat of Port Blair, they had to go round and round the kolhu and extract an amount of fixed amount, about 30 pounds of oil every day. And at the end of the day, it would be measured. And if that was not there, then they would be flogged, or they would not be given food, which anyway they did not want to eat. Gunny sacks that were given to them as clothes would lead to skin rashes and all kinds of other ailments, for which again no medical help provided to them. And this was the kind of condition. Most of the prisoners, they actually either, they were young men, they were in their late teens, early 20s. So many of them either lost their sanity, or there was in fact an entire new mental asylum that was opened in the Andamans called at the Hado Island, where a lot of these people who actually went mad because of the kind of tortures that were given to them could be sent away to the asylum. Many of them even committed suicide. But in the midst of this, you had Savarkar, who was also like a leader to many of these other people, who were all young men who probably didn't even know English, let alone English law and its provisions. So they all used to address him as Bada Babu, and most of those, what are infamously the petitions that Savarkar wrote then, it was not just, asking for his own, release from prison, but also being a kind of a spokesperson for all the other prisoners who could not reach out to the British government, saying, clarify our position. Are we a common convict? Or are we a political prisoner? Because any civilized nation would treat your political prisoners with some amount of dignity and decorum. And here we are being put to this kind of inhuman tortures. The same jail also had the worst of convicts who were convicted of rape and murder and thefts and dacoity and all these hardcore criminals. But even they, if they showed good behavior, they would get remission after 6 months or 1 year. They could go into their settlements, bring their families from mainland India, but that was not given to these, the revolutionary prisoners. So he was also arguing all of this with them, saying, they could not write letters to their family. Only once in 1.5 years, they could meet their family or even write letters. In the middle of this, Savarkar's elder brother's wife died. Neither Savarkar nor his elder brother knew about this. So their families were destroyed and all of that. So these petitions were a means to ensure that the rights of the political prisoners are ascertained. In fact, in his 1917 petition, Savarkar writes that, if my name constitutes an obstacle in the release of all the other political prisoners, you may delete my name and release the others, and that would give me as much happiness as my own release would do. So it was a constant, case for reforms also within the prison. As I said, there were no options to write letters. They were not given paper, pen, newspapers, none of those. So in fact, as a precocious poet that Savarkar also was, he used to use his fingernails or, pieces of charcoal to write poetry on the walls of his cell. And not one or two, but about 3,000 lines of verses of Marathi poetry titled Kamala and Saptarshi that was etched on the walls of his cell. And to spite him, the inhuman jailer who was the, kingpin of all this torture, this man called Barry, he would come and whitewash the walls right in front of him. But little did he know that this man had such a, precocious memory, elephantine memory, that he had memorized all the verses. And when he came out of jail, these poems are still available with us, though they were actually whitewashed on the jails. So from that kind of inhuman torture, there were slowly jail reforms that were being ushered in with the efforts of all these people. Savarkar, there was Barin Ghosh, there was Ulaskar Dutt and several others who were there. And slowly things started changing, particularly during and after the First World War, the royal proclamations of Emperor George and so on, where a library started there. People could start teaching each other. They could slowly start cooking their own food, and this kind of prison reforms towards the end of the First World War. And it was much later, a few decades later, in 1924, that Savarkar was finally released after spending 14 long years in prison. But it was a conditional release. There were two conditions that were put on him. One was that he would remain restricted to the district of Ratnagiri in Maharashtra and not go anywhere out of that. And if he went anywhere, he had to take the permission of the government. The second condition was that he would stay away from active politics for a period of 5 years. Now, the very fact that, the British never trusted him till the time they left India becomes very abundantly clear when every time his petition came up for review at the end of 5 years, they would actually, my book has those, government documents which say, we cannot trust this man. So we cannot afford to, give him freedom, because that would reignite the entire revolutionary movement in Maharashtra. And so it kept getting extended by 2 years. And so what was 5 years of conditional imprisonment and abstinence from politics extended and became 13 long years. So 14 years of hardcore, imprisonment and suffering of the kind I mentioned, and followed by another 13 years of house arrest, where he could not actively take part in any kind of political, work. But around this time, while he was still in prison in 1923, a new thing had happened in his life. And that was, his whole propounding of the philosophy of what is now all the time in the news of Hindutva. And the genesis of this too, and he wrote this very slim book called Essentials of Hindutva, Who is a Hindu? The genesis of that came, about how he saw what was happening in the cellular jail, where the Muslim jailers, the kind of tortures that they did to the Hindu prisoners, forcibly converted them to, their religion, just to ensure that they did not get the kind of tortures that they were facing. And there was no mechanism in the Hindu side to reconvert people back into their fold. That was one major factor which influenced him. But at the same time, there was also this very dangerous, in my view, dangerous movement that was going on in India then, the Khilafat Agitation, which was also, propagated and supported by Gandhiji with the hope of building a Hindu-Muslim unity for the struggle of the freedom. But the Khilafat movement, which was a completely, communal religious movement, an establishment of a pan-Islamic, caliphate in Turkey after the end of the First World War, and to barter the support of Indian Muslims for that, was something that led to a lot of polarization among the communities. And with the failure of the Khilafat movement, communal riots, particularly carnages against the Hindu community, became rife. You had the Mopla uprising in Kerala in 1921, where thousands and thousands of Hindu men, women, and children were butchered in broad daylight. You had riots all over India, in Delhi, in Gulbarga, in Kohat, Panipat, Bengal, Calcutta, different parts of India. And there was no response that particularly the Congress and Gandhiji were giving to this kind of, the kind of militant Wahhabism that was gaining ground in India. And as an intellectual salvo to that was what this Hindutva manual came about, where right at the beginning, Savarkar states that, the word, this Hindutva is not to do with the theological aspects of the Hindu religion, that the spiritual aspects, the theological aspects of life, afterlife, spirituality, we have nothing to do with that. It is a political, a cultural, a nationalistic identity. And he gave this formula, according to him, as to who is a Hindu. Anybody who lives within this, this mass of land from the Indus to the ocean, who considers this land as his or her, holy land, not in terms of religion, but in terms of your allegiance, in terms of your devotion to this land, and not to some Turkey or which sultan sits there or whatever, and your land of your ancestors, Punya Bhumi and Pitru Bhumi. That person, irrespective of what religion he or she follows, in his personal space, would be culturally and nationalistically termed as a Hindu. And so, in fact, he says, what do you do with people like, say, Annie Besant or Sister Nivedita, who were not, this was not their Pitru Bhumi, but he says people like this who follow other faiths, but they have contributed much more to this land. And it's been their karma bhumi, their punya bhumi, much more than some of the indigenous Indians themselves. And so, according to him, culturally and nationally, they would be Hindus. So this became an important project for him, starting in the jail. And after coming out, this had to be put into practice in Ratnagiri. And that's what he did. And this whole idea that the Hindu society was divided and splintered into so many different castes and subcastes. So to somehow unite them, consolidate them, and create a sense of unity or Sangathan. The movement itself was called the Hindu Sangathan movement. And while in Ratnagiri, he talks about a complete annihilation of the caste system, not just untouchability, but all kinds of, varnashrama differences between people, that the only identity that one needs to have is that of a Hindu. And he talks about the 7 shackles that held Hindu society, which need to be dismantled. The Vedokta Bandi, the Vedas are not the preserve of just one community. They are universal knowledge. And so everybody needs to get access to that. Vyavasai Bandi, profession that you follow, it is not something that is by birth, but according to your merit, according to your interests. So you can join any profession, irrespective of which family you're born in. Shuddhi Bandi, the shackle of not being able to get back to your parent religion if you want to, if you have been converted either forcibly or through allurements. So the Shuddhi, this whole movement of Shuddhi should be allowed. Sparsha Bandi, a complete removal of untouchability. Samudra Bandi, the whole idea that if you cross the oceans, you're going to lose your caste and so on. That he did not believe in, that you need to actually get the best of everything outside the world and come back and use it for your country. And Roti Bandi and Beti Bandi, intercaste dining and intercaste marriage. In fact, he started the first intercaste cafe in Ratnagiri, where people of all communities could sit together and eat. At a time when, even among the Maharashtrian Brahmins, the Chitpavans and the Deshasthas would not sit together and eat. Here was a cafe, a very revolutionary movement, which brought people of different castes to have Sahbhojan during all their programs. The first ever temple where people of all communities could go and pray, the Patit Pavan Mandir that was started in Ratnagiri in 1931 was something that he began there. The Asprishya Ganpati, using Tilak's whole, idea of the Ganesha Chaturthi festival to galvanize masses. This was an untouchable Ganpati where, the priest would be someone from the lowest denomination of the caste strata. And even the Brahmin had to go and touch his feet to take blessings and, worship the Ganpati. Also, untouchability eradication in the schools, where people of all, children of all castes could sit together and study. So numerous such, measures, but done in a small way, only in Ratnagiri in the 13 years. And in fact, he wrote several times to Dr. Ambedkar saying, we have done a pilot project here. We have shown you in these 13 years how caste untouchability could be completely eradicated, and we could consolidate the society as one cohesive group. And it's up to you, someone like you, who could scale this up to the rest of India. And in fact, Ambedkar also wrote several laudatory letters to him saying that you're the only one who has understood that the root of the caste system is the Varnashrama system, and dismantling that would lead to, annihilation of caste. But somehow the two people never met while he was, interned in Ratnagiri. So after these 13 long years, he finally, gets freedom, political freedom. And in 1937, he's out of Ratnagiri, free to join politics or whatever he wants to do. And at that time, the Congress actively wooed him to join their party. But Savarkar is famously supposed to have said that I'd rather be in the last row of the patriots than in the first row of the traitors. So, and according to him, the Congress party, through its various means of appeasement, had already sown the seeds of the partition of the country. And so he'd rather not join them because, according to him, he would feel stifled there. And so he decided to lead this party, which was hardly a political party then, the Hindu Mahasabha. It had almost been like an appendage of the Congress, but that was given in a new zeal by Savarkar as its president, and making it a fighting fit, electorally fighting fit party in the 5 years that he led as its president. And, in those were also tumultuous times when you had, the outbreak of the Second World War. You also had the Cripps mission, which came to India, and followed by, of course, the Quit India movement. In all those times, Savarkar, normally the allegation that is hurled against him and the Hindu Mahasabha is that, they did not participate in the Quit India movement, and so was somehow, outside the periphery of the freedom struggle. Now, for that also, the actual rationalization of that was, the Quit India movement itself was launched in such a haste. There was a lot of opposition for that within the Congress itself, including, the president of the Congress then, Maulana Azad. And within a few days of its announcement, the entire top brass of the Congress, from Gandhiji downwards, were actually put in jail. So it was a program which was launched without any plan of action as to what exactly was needed. So this do or die that was used, it actually became a bloody revolutionary movement where all the underground revolutionaries resurfaced. It was a violent movement, and also common people who the satyagrahis, in the lack of a actual leadership or a proper plan of action, did not know what exactly to do with it. And in fact, the Congress famously had disowned itself from what it had called the August Disturbances. They were not really, the Quit India was a later term that was given to this movement. It was initially called the August Disturbances. So within 2 to 3 months of the launch of this movement, it had actually been crushed, by the British. So in 1942, by the end of the year, the movement had, ceased to exist. But around this time, the Hindu Mahasabha had started this whole idea of a militarization or a Sainikikaran that was started in different parts of India. And there were multiple reasons for that. One was, of course, the communal balance in the British Indian Army, about which even Dr. Ambedkar writes in his book, Pakistan and Thoughts on Partition, where he says by the time the Second World War started, about 60% of the British Indian Army was composed of the Muslims of the Northwest Frontier Province, the Hindu, the Gurkha and other regiments. They were consistently coming down in numbers. And even Dr. Ambedkar notes with alarm that if this number, the composition continues this way, it's going to be a threat to the country, because he, questions if there is an attack on this country, say from Afghanistan, will the Muslim soldier actually support his co-religionist or the country of his origin? And so it's a cause for alarm, and that something needs to be done by the Hindu society. And that was exactly what the Mahasabha did, where the idea was to ensure that a lot of Hindus joined the army, gained training in warfare, in weaponry and so on, which they had been deprived of for so many years, and then using that, create that insurrection in the army about which I spoke about earlier. And that is exactly what happened. A lot of feeder circuit. So young men who were recruited into the British Indian Army took training in arms and were later, they defected over to the Indian National Army, which was formed by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. In fact, a lot of testimonies of the soldiers who were caught during the INA trials, some of them I have quoted in my book as well, where they say we joined the army on Barrister Savarkar's recommendation, and much later we crossed over and joined the INA. So this was what the Mahasabha was doing at that time, which is wrongly assumed as these people were actually helping join the British Army and helping the British cause. The idea was to militarize, to ensure also that in the eventuality of a civil war between the two major communities, which was looming large, one community should not be at a disadvantage only because it did not have sufficient training in weaponry and arms and so on. So to create this balance was what this militarization also was. And then, of course, the succeeding years, which led to partition and the entire tragic events surrounding that and our independence. By then, of course, the Hindu Mahasabha had somehow, and there I also castigate Savarkar as a bad leader, where he did not understand, the electoral politics and how to actually make their presence felt on the Viceroy's negotiating table, unlike the Congress and the Muslim League. And the Hindu Mahasabha slowly, after a surge in its fortunes, started dwindling. And the party came a cropper in the 1946 elections. There were so many factions within the party too. There was a Savarkar faction. There was a Shama Prasad Mukherjee faction in Bengal, the Bengal versus Maharashtra. There were North Indian zamindars. So all of them jostling against each other. And in that became the nemesis of the Hindu Mahasabha, which eventually petered out of the electoral politics of India. Post-independence, of course, Savarkar faced one of the biggest, challenges in his life, which was his implication in Gandhiji's assassination, the tragic assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. And the whole idea was of putting him into the dock was because of the fact that Nathuram Godse and Narayan Apte were former members of the Hindu Mahasabha, and they were very staunch Savarkar, acolytes in the early 1940s. But then later, Godse himself, in his testimony in court, had said that, closer to independence, Savarkar had turned pacifist, and he was saying that, now we are having an Indian government, so we should oppose them electorally and not through violent means. And so most of these young men who believed in a kind of a militant version of Hindutva were being increasingly disillusioned with Savarkar, as Godse says in his court testimony, and that we moved away from there. And but the entire edifice of the prosecution's case was on one particular approver who came there called Digambar Badge, who said that, these two men, Godse and Apte, along with Badge, went to Savarkar's house, and Savarkar is supposed to have famously, or rather infamously, said in Marathi, "Yashasvi houn ya," or be successful and come back. And that was a euphemism that go and assassinate him and come back. But the Red Fort trials in Delhi went on for almost one whole year, during which he was incarcerated in the Red Fort in Delhi. But at the end of the whole trial, the judge found that there was no evidence against Savarkar, while Godse and Apte and others were, executed. Several of the others, there were almost 9 people part of this conspiracy. Most of the others were imprisoned for 14 years, 15 years. Savarkar was the only one who was honorably exonerated from the case. But then still, the moral albatross of that case, hung on his neck all through. In fact, there's a famous letter which Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, writes to Sardar Patel, the then Home Minister, saying, there's an old man, he has suffered so much in his life. So please ensure that he's not treated harshly about Savarkar. To which Sardar Patel says, we are not going to go on a witch hunt. We are going to give him all the legal, measures to defend himself. But then, legally he may be cleared from this, but morally he will be culpable. And I think that has become the tragedy of, Savarkar's legacy, since this talk is also about his life and legacy, that though he was exonerated by the court after trial, and more recently in 2018, there was somebody who filed a PIL in the Supreme Court, saying that the Kapoor Commission, which was later set up, implicated him without getting into actually the evidences, and that's a long story in itself. So this Pankaj Fadnis filed a PIL saying, this does a lot of harm to Savarkar's legacy, and he needed a redressal. And the Supreme Court actually appointed an amicus curiae, which sat over the entire trial papers, the Kapoor Commission, for 1.5 years. And after that, a bench headed by Justice Bobde, who was the CJI, and Justice Nageshwar Rao came out with the verdict that the petitioners claim that Savarkar has been implicated in the assassination does not hold, and that the original trial court's verdict of exonerating him, that is what holds. A commission of inquiry cannot supersede a court of inquiry. And so this was as recent as 2018, 4 years ago. But still, I think Sardar Patel's letter rings in everyone's ears that legally one may be exonerated, but the moral culpability of that keeps, haunting this man like an albatross around his neck. And so every time there is talk of a Bharat Ratna being awarded to him or any such thing, these ghosts of the past continue to haunt his legacy. Of course, after independence, the kind of, the incarceration in the Red Fort, and also later during the Nehru-Liaquat Pact, the manner in which all the opposition leaders, including him, were sent away to jail, all of this somewhere disillusioned and dispirited him quite a bit. Though he kept, writing a lot of articles, cautioning Nehru's government about many of the problems that the country would face. For instance, warning against China's imperialistic designs, or the demographic change in the Northeast and how that could lead to security problems for the country. Numerous such things that he was writing about. But by then, I think he'd become a pale shadow of what he initially was. Nobody was listening to him. Even Shyama Prasad Mukherjee had broken away from the Mahasabha and formed the Jan Sangh. The Hindu Mahasabha had almost, liquidated itself. And so in such a scenario, the last few years of his life were rather sad and lonely, with no supporters, nobody standing by him much. And in 1966, eventually on 26th of February, Savarkar passed away. Of course, he did not pass away in the natural way. It was the whole, that Jain tradition, of Paryopaveshan, where one stops eating food and taking water, medicines. He said, I've completed my responsibility to my motherland, and so now it's time to go. And so that was how this man passed away in 1966. Of course, the then Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi, had issued a glowing tribute as to how his contribution in the annals of the Indian freedom struggle are a separate chapter in itself, and how his name was a very byword for patriotism and courage and sacrifice. She also gave money for a memorial in his name, issued a stamp in his honor, also got a documentary film made, about his life. Of course, things have changed so much in the 60 years thereafter. And like I began at the start of my talk, today, Savarkar becomes a football in the political arena, where in the Congress, BJP, constant clashes that we are witness to all the time, the vitriol, the toxic environment of politics, people of the past, characters of the past like Savarkar, their legacy also become a part of the football. And to, demean your opponent, these political characters of the past are also invoked, and they are also demeaned. And unfortunately, I think that is where the legacy of the man today stands. But today I'm glad that we are at least being able to have a discussion like this, and at such a prestigious forum like Jigyasa, because I think, even 3 decades ago, talking about Savarkar would mean that you pay a very heavy price, with your livelihood, with your reputation, all of it going for a toss. I often quote the case of Pandit Hridaynath Mangeshkar, Lataji's brother, who was working in the All India Radio. And as I said, Savarkar was a great poet, in addition to being an ideologue and a politician and everything. And so he had written these wonderful Marathi poems, Jayostute and Sagara, Pran, Tadamalala, and so on. And Hridaynathji had just tuned these poems, and his sisters, Lataji, Ashaji, and all of them had sung this. And for that crime of actually, touching Savarkar's poems, he got a show cause notice from All India Radio saying, can you explain why you picked this poem? So Hridaynathji gives this very nonchalant 2-line reply saying, good poem, great poet, and that should be reason enough to pick them. But for that crime, he lost his job at the All India Radio. So I think the cornerstone of democracy, where people you may disagree with, you may have differences of opinion, but to make somebody a persona non grata, and quite ironically, a man like Savarkar, who all his life strove for eradication of social untouchability, became a political untouchable, where talking about him meant, ensured that you lose your job, your reputation, and all of that. I think at least that has changed, where today we are able to have this conversation. If I write, books on him, of course, I face the backlash all the time, not only nationally, but also internationally. But at least, a mainstream publisher can come today and publish these books. And that, I think, is a healthy departure. The more, I always say, one can love to love the man, or one can love to hate the man. But whatever it be, let your love or hatred for him be informed. Let it not be based on rhetoric. Let it not be based on misinformation or conjectures. Informed opinion about a character of the past, in my view, is very important. So I think I've overshot my time, but thank you so much for being such a patient, and audience on a Thursday morning. I'm now completely open for questions from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sampathji. It was really very interesting and very informative. Many of the facts were not known to us, and I'm sure some of us may be having some questions or comments to make.
Sure.
Let us have an open discussion now. Any?
Sir, I wish I wish that we didn't have to drag the contemporary politics into this discussion.
Yeah.
It's basically about history, but it's impossible to avoid at least some question which might also reflect on the present day politics. There is such extreme polarization.
Yeah.
Is it in this context, would you say that the present dispensation is a true inheritor of the values and ideology of Savarkar, or they have deviated from
it? After prefacing it, saying we would not want to talk about politics, you're dragging me into quicksand.
No, I know, because your response.
I wouldn't completely agree that they are an inheritor of his values or so on. In fact, I would also say probably, Indira Gandhi's government was to a large extent also, picked and chose many things from Savarkar's, ideological basket. I mean, here was a lady prime minister who ensured that our opponent Pakistan was eventually broken up in battle. She brought Madan Lal Dhingra, one of the associates of Savarkar in London, his ashes from there, and got it in Amritsar. On very similar lines, Mr. Modi also got the ashes of Shyamji Krishna Verma from the UK and got it consecrated in Gujarat. So I think it's a pick and choose. It's not possible for any government, I think, or any dispensation to completely follow one particular leader. They, I think, need to pick and choose elements of Gandhi's legacy, elements of Savarkar, elements of different. Ambedkar, of course, is the larger rubric on which entire social justice mechanism is established. So I wouldn't completely agree that they are a true inheritor of his values. Otherwise, I don't understand what could prevent. It's just a signature which could actually ensure that he gets the Bharat Ratna. If they actually really believe that he deserves that award, that should be given, so that that's a correction of a historical wrong, just as a lot of other historical wrongs are supposedly being corrected. Netaji being given his due place, including his statue being installed in Delhi, and Sardar Patel, Ambedkar, all of them. Savarkar somehow still escapes that the same resurrection that probably the others got, or what he deserved.
Other, just a brief question I had was that, of course, as you say, he was finally exonerated from the accusation about his implication in the assassination. But did you ever condemn that assassination? Did you ever criticize Godse brothers for assassinating somebody who had given all his life to the freedom movement, and what kind of person he was?
I mean, yes, including in his, immediately after the murder, the statements that Savarkar put forth condemning the murder, and also later, even in court, in his long testimony, which I actually have reproduced in my book, he says, I do not, approve of an Indian taking the life of another Indian. We were doing that against the colonial officials earlier. That's a different thing. Today, when an Indian government, and that was Godse's, source of disappointment with his former mentor, that he was turning pacifist, that, he was saying that today we have an Indian government headed by our compatriots in power. If we have difference of opinion with them, it's only through the ballot and not through the bullet that we can, settle our differences. And that is something that they possibly differed with each other.
In fact, what he did or what he said has to be seen in the context of that time.
Yeah,
that is very important. What was happening in the country, what were the circumstances?
true.
Context is very important.
Uh, I have put in a few questions, Dr. Sampath, in the chat box. If you can kindly, I don't need to repeat them. I'm Rajendra Banawat, so I just mentioned a few. If you have been able to read them, or should I read them out?
Yeah, I think this is why was Savarkar not eliminated?
Because you said Britishers found that he was extremely dangerous, then he was with them, so he could, like it happens in any encounter or any other manner, he could have been eliminated. Or were they too liberal to do that? I mean, and they were too democratic to show to the world that no, that we don't want to do this. Just a question which comes to mind: if he was so dangerous, why was he not eliminated? Any, if you have gone through any document which they had a plan to do so, or they just did not succeed in doing that, I mean, just
No,
like that.
I think they probably also underestimated the fact that he could come out of jail and do something else. The idea to send people off to Kalapani was to ensure that, they're just far away from the mainland of India and also from the hub of all activities. And they thought that that was as good as eliminating a person. And, there was no, like, I forgot to also mention that, before he was being sent to Kalapani, all his degrees were taken away from him. His entire family property was, confiscated, including utensils of the house. So while one talks about Savarkar and his brother, the family, the respective wives and children and others, they literally had to survive their livelihood through beggary. So the British government probably thought that completely financially, stripping them of all sources and putting the person himself in such a distant jail and under such torturous circumstances would anyway break anybody's spine. So that would be as good as eliminating physically. So I think unlike now, there was no policy of maybe encounters that was done. So, but that's a very interesting question that you posed.
One more thing just comes to mind. Ambedkar, you said, and Ambedkar and Savarkar are very similar in the annihilation of the caste system in the society. Yeah. What do you, as a guess, or if they were both coming together and working together for the cause of removal of all those elements for the Hindu society, probably Hindu society would not have been branded as such as it is being done. Was it because he was born in a Brahmin family, or anything that you might have given thought to it?
It's because, repeatedly Savarkar, wrote to Ambedkar saying, come to Ratnagiri, see what we are doing here. And this is just a pilot project and you can be the successor of this project. You scale it up all over India. Ambedkar curiously only wrote, laudatory letters, but he was very scared to share stage with him. And I think that that comes from the fact that even then, anybody who would be associated with Savarkar would have had to pay a price. And Ambedkar eventually was also part of the Viceroy's Council and so on, even at the peak of the 1942 agitations. So somewhere he was also probably did not want to jeopardize his whole career or whatever by being seen with a man who has antecedents like this, who is not in the best of books of the British government. And that is one reason till he came out of Ratnagiri they never met, but after that they did meet. And in fact later on, interestingly, I found this anecdote that even when he was the law minister, when Savarkar's trial was going on, he used to come to the Red Fort trials and, listen to what's going on. And it is said at one instance that, he called up Savarkar's lawyer, Bhopatkar, and says, I need to discuss something with you. And then they meet at a crossing in Delhi, and he asks him to hop inside the car, Bhopatkar, and then says, your client is being fixed in this case. There is no case against him, and this fixing is being done at the highest, echelons of power. The entire cabinet is vastly divided on this issue. Be rest assured, the case is very weak, and your client will come scot-free. So somewhere, I think there was this bonhomie between them, coming from the same state, same kind of, linguistic background, and all of that. But at least in those internment years in Ratnagiri, he preferred to stay away from him. And that was a sad part, because as you rightly said, I think if they had come together on the social reform project, we would have had a very different, outcome of what happened of social reforms, untouchability, and so on.
Thank you. You have been informative and provocative both. So I'll reserve my question for some other time. Let others ask. I think.
But did they ever meet?
I would like to ask one pointed question. Maisi Srivastav.
Yes, sir.
Am I clear?
Yes. Yes.
I'm so much overwhelmed by your oratorial skill. You did not consult any notes or anything. You have everything. And wonderful. I think you have enlightened us so much. It's an eye-opener, this your talk. And I'm grateful. In fact, I'm lucky to have listened to you. But you see, people have hardly any time. The TV channels, we and they syndrome. So one thing that is always right, the other person is wrong. You see, they talk over each other. I mean, all the time they are shooting their own voice at each other. So I am only concerned, and I'm also requesting you probably, you are the one person who can dispel many misgivings. I mean, I'm not sure, your book should be reviewed and you should be giving talks. You can dispel the what should I call, horror, cloud of, this is an eye-opener. He was such a great patriot. I think there is no comparison.
Yeah.
Even Subhash Chandra Bose, I think one could come closely, but he sacrificed so much. And the fellow is branded now like a football. You say that it's true, very true.
Mr.
But
Kumar,
very dismaying, very disappointing for the, so-called intellectuals like us, whether we are intellectuals or not, but we are serious. But there is a need in the society.
Yes, sir.
Concerned persons, they should come out and dispel this, because this is going on all the time on TV and newspapers, and this misinformation.
Yes, I agree.
Exaggerated things.
Sir, the solution is not to see TV channels, but read books.
I don't see, yaar. मैं तो switch on कर देता हूँ. मैं नहीं देखता.
Kumar,
वो कपिल शर्मा का देखना पसंद करता हूँ. सब कसम टाइप जब ये होने लग जाता है.
Kumar sir? Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Sampath, I'm R.S. Kumar, speaking from Bombay. I find that you're saying that Ambedkar and Savarkar, they didn't meet during this pre-independence period. But after independence, they had enough time and opportunity to meet and go together. Why didn't it happen?
No, after independence, Savarkar himself withdrew from public life. He was so disillusioned with everything, and especially after his imprisonment, in the Gandhi murder case, I think he was a completely broken man. He said, "I don't want to participate in politics at all." And Ambedkar, after that, also didn't survive for too long. The way he was also edged out of Nehru's cabinet. I think the two people, it was just a classic mistiming where they never came together, at that time. But between 37 and 47, they did meet a couple of times after he came out of Ratnagiri.
But a very illuminating talk.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I think Sanjay ji has raised his hand.
Sanjay ji?
Can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay. One question and a piece of information to everybody who is attending. Mr. Vikram Sampath has kindly consented to be a speaker in the Jaipur Dialogues Festival on the 5th and 6th November. So anybody wants to meet him physically can meet him there. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it online? Is it online?
No.
Jaipur Dialogue Is Jaipur dialogue online or it is only physical?
It is both physical and online this year.
Can you send the link? Can you send the link?
I will send a link. I'll send an invite also. I'll send it to Mr. Bissa.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. My question, Vikram.
Yes.
This is regarding that vilification that is often made of Savarkar regarding the letters he wrote for clemency. I just want to have a clarification, because according to my studies, the provision for clemency existed in the British law at that time.
Yes.
And anybody who would apply for clemency was actually making use of the laws as they existed.
That's right.
Now, something beyond that was actually made use of by Nehru in Nabha, when he was arrested in Nabha, when he was leading protests there, and he was actually convicted.
Yes.
And within hours of his conviction, the British administrator, who was actually heading the Nabha state at that time, pardoned him at the instance of the Viceroy.
Right.
And that is something that is never heard. But this vilification that is made of Savarkar, of having written and asked for clemency, can you just enlighten me about the law as it existed at that point of time?
Yeah. So, as I've mentioned, several times, this was a very normal, the way it's made out to be is that as if Savarkar was given the special privilege of filing a petition. It was a normal agency, just as you can have a lawyer to defend your case. You could also file petitions. And during that entire period, the British government, not only in India, but in across all her colonies, royal proclamations were being given, pardons before, during, and after the First World War. This is a very common thing even nowadays. During the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, you have, as a goodwill measure, you have a lot of prisoners being left out on remissions, or people who are let away if they show good behavior. So that's the kind of process that was there, and to get that benefit, you had to file a petition. They call it a mercy petition. I don't call it a mercy petition. It is just a yachika, a petition. In fact, in my book, in the appendix, I have put all the petitions. There were 7 or so. Nowhere does he say, an apology or, I'm sorry for what I have done or something. It's all the time, as I mentioned, these are, asking for, explain my position, clarify my position, and also acting as a spokesperson for the other political prisoners, as I mentioned. So I think this is a very, very wrong, because several others, barring Ghosh, Ulaskar, Dutt, all those people who were there in the cellular jail, they also filed petitions. You had Sachindranath Sanyal, who founded later the HRA. He filed petitions. Much later, you had Ram Prasad Bismil, Ashfaqullah Khan, all of them. The petitions were filed for them by many people, including Madan Mohan Malviya and others. And in fact, in 1920, when Savarkar's younger brother approaches Gandhiji and says, please help my brothers, get out of jail. They've already spent 1 decade in jail. Gandhiji himself says, you ask your brothers to file a petition, and I will also file a petition on their behalf to the British government. So if petitioning was such a bad word, then Gandhiji also, would not have done that. So it was very much a part of the political legal process of the time that political convicts could file petitions to get out of jail. And it's just that it is distorted and presented in a different way today, as if someone apologized and sold your soul. If he had actually sold his soul and become a British stooge, he would not have been kept in house arrest for 13 years after coming out of jail. So that very fact that they did not trust him ensured that, he was kept under house arrest in Ratnagiri for such a long time. I think Mr. Ajit Singh has a...
Yeah. Good afternoon, Dr. Sampath.
Good afternoon.
I will introduce myself. I am an alumnus of the famous or infamous GNU. I did my post-graduation in sociology from there. And then I worked in the IAS from 1983 to 2016. Before joining GNU, I had heard of mafia term, but mafia was primarily pertaining to the domain of crimes. At GNU, for the first time, I witnessed the existence of mafia in academia also. And I use the jargon to describe them as mafio academia. Now, please tell us about your tryst with the Indian mafio academia in league with its international counterpart led by Audrey Trust. That is my first one. Because one read in the newspapers and all that, I would like to hear the first-hand experience.
Well, since the time the books came out, I've been under such constant vicious attack from the same mafia that you spoke about, sir, that, all kinds of things. First, I have no allegiance to any political party or something, but then you attribute motives to somebody. You say you're doing it at the behest of someone. I don't know where those paychecks are that apparently keep coming from some quarters to us who are actually trying to work hard and bring the truth as we see it. This began with a lot of campaigns within India. And slowly, I was also forewarned about this by several people. Somebody who was like a mole in this gang told me that a lot of money has also been exchanged to ensure that our Wikipedia pages are vandalized. Wikipedia is an active partner in this whole campaign against India and people who are pro-India. And so I knew right from October, November that something big was brewing, and that was it blew over in earlier this year with the people you mentioned, sitting outside India, passing judgments on us, making all kinds of allegations, which I had no other option but to take the whole matter to court and file a defamation case against them for maligning my reputation. And I'm glad, touch wood, that so far the court has ruled in my favor and held this whole thing as prima facie defamatory, and also deleted most of the tweets and articles that were written against me in the process. So it's a constant fight that one has to indulge in. The same mafia all used to scoff, saying, where are the alternative scholarship? Where are the scholars from the other side? And when one or two just try to surface and actually work hard to put their viewpoint, then the whole ammunition is marshaled against them to destroy them forever. But I think I'm made of sterner stuff than they think. And so that's one reason I decided that it's good to give it back in the manner that they understand.
Yeah, linked to the first question that I have had is the emergence of this cancel culture by the same mafia. I believe some of your talks were cancelled, and even Sai Deepak's talk was cancelled.
Yes.
So how strong is this cancel culture now?
It is very, very, very strong, particularly in academia. It's a gatekeeping where a dog in the manger, we will not allow you in our midst. Literature festivals and so on too. As was mentioned in my introduction, I founded the Bangalore Literature Festival, but the cancel culture was so much that I had to resign from my own festival, and that was a controversy in itself about 7-8 years ago. So I think the left, revels in this kind of, they cannot sit on the same platform, have an honest, discussion and debate. All you can do is to cut all sources of discussion, dissent, debate with anybody with differing viewpoints, and maligning someone, ensuring that they are completely discredited. That is also sadly a part of this toolkit.
And finally, a suggestion or a request.
Yes, sir.
As you are a very prolific writer,
yeah,
may I request you to write 2 books. One, the one and only illegitimate Prime Minister of India. Number 2, which is related to the Khilafat movement that you had mentioned.
Yeah.
Can we have, I believe that, I wouldn't like to name the person, okay, but the person who legitimized pan-India communal polity only to establish and perpetuate his own supremacy in the Congress. So these are the 2 books I think we may consider writing on.
Sure, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think we have had enough of discussions now.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was really very interesting.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to everyone. Thanks. I think it really widened my horizon too, and sharing my work with all veterans like all of you.
Very interesting.
Really
Illuminating, I would say.
Thank you.
Visa ji, आप formal thanks कर दीजिए.
Visa साहब.
Visa ji, कहाँ चले गए?
Well, Visa साहब is probably
okay.
Yeah.
You the vote of thanks.
Dr. Sampath, it's indeed very kind of you to have agreed to speak to our forum. You had some preoccupations, but finally you agreed to come and speak on Savarkar. In fact, initially you had wanted to speak on Govardhan, but we requested you once again that please speak on Savarkar because we know very little about him, and he raises all kinds of controversies. At least there must be some informed discussion on a person of his stature. So that is indeed very kind, and of course your talk has been most fascinating. It's been both informative as well as entertaining because you narrated so many interesting anecdotes. Indeed, he's a worthy subject for a good film. I don't know if there is any romantic side to his life.
Unfortunately, no.
but I'm told that he was very fond of whiskeys. Is that a fact?
Yeah.
He was, so at least something interesting. So anyway, it's very nice hearing you.
Thank you, sir.
The subject is indeed vast. I'm told that you were planning to write 3 volumes on it.
Yes.
But ultimately, publisher insisted that you restrict yourself only to 2 volumes.
Yeah.
And second volume itself is 700 pages, and nowadays people have very little patience.
Yeah.
But it's great to have heard you, and we thank you very much. And we do hope that we'll have you again sometime to speak on a subject of music or
certainly, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very kind. And thank you to all of you to come and participate. Thank you.
Namaskar.
Thank you, sir.